The cube that drops into your glass right now was once a fortune. 200 years ago, frozen water was a luxury commodity, cut by hand from New England lakes, packed in sawdust, and sailed across the equator. A 22-year-old Bostonian bet his family's money that people in the tropics would pay for it. Everyone laughed. He lost everything, went to debtor's prison, and came out the other side wealthy enough that his modern net worth is estimated near $200 million. The popular story credits him with a brilliant idea about transporting ice. That version is wrong. The real invention was not logistics, it was teaching people to want cold. The story most people tell begins with Frederic Tudor having a vision. It didn't. The idea came from his older brother William. Around 1801, the Tudor family gathered on a Beacon Hill porch in Boston. They were Brahmins, neighbors with the Adamses and the Hancocks, with a father who had worked with John Adams and helped found the Massachusetts Historical Society. The family also owned a pond that froze solid every winter. At a gathering that evening, William cracked a joke. Why not harvest the pond and ship the ice to colonists sweating in the West Indies? The table laughed. Frederic didn't. He filed the remark away. He also wasn't the first person to keep ice through a hot summer. Persian builders had been doing it for more than 2,000 years, erecting domed underground chambers called yakhchals that held frozen blocks deep into desert months. Roman emperors had slaves hauling snow from the mountains. What none of them had attempted was shipping ice across an ocean. That, Tudor decided, was his contribution. He had refused to go to Harvard and chose an apprenticeship instead, and the ice scheme was the kind of project a young man without a vocation might attempt. By February 1806, he had raised $10,000 from family and friends, bought 80 tons of ice from a frozen Massachusetts pond, and tried to book passage to Martinique. No captain would take the cargo. Crews feared that a hold full of melting ice would flood the bilge and sink the ship, so Tudor bought his own brig, the Favorite, for $4,750, nearly half his stake, and sailed himself. The Boston Gazette noticed. On February 10, 1806, the paper published a line that would follow Tudor for the rest of his life. No joke, it read. A vessel with a cargo of 80 tons of ice has cleared out from this port for Martinique. We hope this will not prove to be a slippery speculation. The phrase stuck. So did the mockery. Friends called him the Iceman behind his back, and not as a compliment. His brother William had already gone to Martinique in 1805 to prepare the way for him, and a third brother, John Henry, had died of an illness on the journey home near Philadelphia in January 1802, possibly worsened by the heat the brothers had endured in Cuba in 1801. Whether grief hardened the running joke into an obsession, or whether Frederic simply needed a project the rest of Boston would not let him have, the result was the same. He arrived in St. Pierre, Martinique, to find no ice house waiting, no buyer lined up, and a tropical dock where the temperature climbed past 80 degrees. Wealthy colonists had never tasted a cold drink. The first sales were brisk. The operation still bled money. He lost roughly $4,500 on that first voyage. The next 3 shipments, sent to Cuba, lost more. By the time Tudor sailed home, his brothers and cousins were calling the venture the family folly. By 1812, Tudor's personal debts had outgrown his creditors' patience. He was arrested 3 times and spent parts of 1812 and 1813 in debtor's prison, a small Boston cell where he managed his failing tropical business by letter. He had to fight to keep his personal effects, and the family home on Beacon Hill barely escaped seizure. Visitors reported that he was cheerful. He told one friend, "Let those laugh who win," and he meant it. To Tudor, the joke was not yet over. It was just entering the 3rd round. This was the moment any rational person would have quit. Tudor did not quit. He did something stranger. He started solving the problem one piece at a time, the way a man patches a leaking boat rather than scraps it. The first fix was insulation. Tudor and his men began packing the holds of their ships in sawdust which turned out to be a near magical insulator, cutting melt loss dramatically. Some ships arrived in the Caribbean with most of their cargo still solid. The second fix was tropical storage. In 1815, he borrowed $2,100 and built a double-walled ice house in Havana, 25 feet square on the outside, 19 feet square on the inside, 16 feet high, with sawdust packed between the walls. He designed it himself, drawing on borrowed architectural books and what he had learned from watching carpenters frame ice houses back home. The crew who built it had never seen anything like it, a building whose only job was to keep one commodity cold in the middle of a Cuban summer. It was the first proper architecture in the Caribbean designed to hold American ice. Each fix kept the idea alive. None of them proved that anyone would pay for the result. The first profits were thin. Gross sales reached about $7,400 in 1810, then $9,000, with maybe $1,000 actually reaching Tudor's pocket. After a decade of work, he had a chain of well-insulated ice houses, stretching from Havana to Charleston, a small fleet of ships, and a business that was still losing money. Most of the capital stayed in the tropics, in sawdust, and in the holds of ships he was still trying to convince captains to sail. He had built a better mousetrap. He had not built a market. The question had never really been whether ice could survive the trip. The question was whether people in places that had never seen ice would ever want it badly enough to make the venture worthwhile. And on that question, Tudor was about to discover something the popular version of his story never quite credits him for. Here is where the popular version of Tudor's story goes wrong. He is remembered as a logistics genius, the man who figured out how to ship a perishable commodity across the equator. That is the least interesting thing he did. The hard part was not transport, it was desire. In the bars of Havana and St. Pierre, Tudor began giving bartenders free ice for an entire year. While the ice flowed, he taught the bartenders how to keep it frozen overnight in a simple insulated jar. He taught them new drinks built around ice, mint, sugar, citrus, and local spirits. The kind of recipes that would later be called smashes. He walked them through the drinks and let them watch customers taste a cold drink for the first time in their lives. The strategy was not generosity, it was addiction. A customer who had once tasted a cold smash in a Havana bar did not go back to warm rum. The bartender who had once served it did not stop ordering ice. Within a year, those bartenders were Tudor's best-paying customers, buying out of pocket the product he had given them for free the year before. The Havana ice house that had been bleeding money suddenly had a waiting list. One night in Martinique, Tudor reportedly used a portion of his melting cargo to make ice cream. By one account, he took in $300 before the evening ended, more than the first Martinique voyage had earned on its best day. The story may be tidier than the evidence supports. The pattern it describes is real. Tudor was selling a habit before he was selling a commodity, and the habit was the only thing that would make the commodity pay. But Tudor did not build the empire alone, and the man who actually made the business work is the one history quietly erased. His name was Nathaniel Jarvis Wyeth, the son of the keeper of the Fresh Pond Hotel in Cambridge. Around 1825, when Wyeth was 23, he invented the ice plow, a horse-drawn device that scored frozen ponds with a perfect grid. It let crews lift uniform, stackable blocks, instead of hacking out irregular chunks that melted unevenly and shipped badly. A few years later, he patented an above-ground, double-walled ice house packed with straw, the missing piece of storage architecture that made the whole system work at scale. Until Wyeth's inventions, a harvest crew could cut a pond in 3 days and lose half of it to melt. After Wyeth's inventions, they could cut the same pond in a day and ship most of what they cut. Tudor's production more than tripled after Wyeth joined. The Ice King story credits Tudor with the entire operation. The operation depended on a tool and a young man the story has forgotten. Wyeth eventually left the ice business to chase fur trade dreams in the Pacific Northwest, failed twice, and died in Cambridge in 1856. Tudor took the title. Wyeth took the silence. By the early 1830s, the ice trade had outgrown the Caribbean. In May 1833, Tudor loaded the brig Tuscany with 180 tons of Massachusetts ice and pointed her toward Calcutta. The voyage would take 4 months across tropical seas. If the cargo survived, the gamble could open an entire continent. If it didn't, Tudor would be finished for good. The Tuscany docked at Calcutta on September 6th. 100 tons were still solid. 80 tons had melted into nothing on the way, but 80 tons had not melted into nothing, and that was the part that mattered. The arrival was treated as an event. The Governor General issued a proclamation welcoming the first American ice to reach India. Tudor's local agent, William Rogers, received a silver vase from the colonial administration. The remaining 100 tons sold at 6.5 cents a pound, $12,500 against an investment that had not exceeded $500. By any measure, it was the most profitable ice shipment in history. Tudor named his next ships after what he sold. Vessels that read now like a private joke about what the world had decided was ordinary. From Calcutta, the trade spread. By the 1840s, Tudor was supplying ice to Queen Victoria at Windsor. The British had a long memory for cold drinks, and the colonial gentry of India and the Caribbean had taken the habit home. In the summer of 1844, a company called the Wenham Lake Ice Company opened a storefront on the Strand in London and placed a single block of ice in the window. For many Londoners passing on the pavement, it was the first frozen water they had ever seen. They stopped to press their hands against it. Punch magazine ran a joke in 1845 that the company's entire capital appeared to consist of large blocks of ice. So, great care must be taken not to melt the whole of the capital. Florence Nightingale, who knew something about preserving things in warm rooms, would later write that in poorhouses and infirmaries, Wenham Lake ice was the only thing that stopped milk from curdling in summer. 2 years earlier, in 1842, Tudor had built a cylindrical, double-walled ice house on the beach in Madras. It still stands. After the natural ice trade collapsed in the late 1800s, the building changed hands several times. In 1897, a young Hindu monk named Swami Vivekananda, recently returned from the West, stayed there for 9 days. The structure is now a museum called the Vivekananda Ilam. The ice house Tudor built to store Massachusetts frozen water still holds visitors in Chennai. A novelty had become a shared habit. In the decade before the American Civil War, American ships carried more tonnage of ice than of any commodity except cotton. Cities depended on it. Bars depended on it. Hospitals depended on it. The icebox in the pantry, the cold lemonade at the dinner, the chilled claret at the club, all of it traced back to a frozen Massachusetts pond and a man who refused to stop. Tudor did not invent refrigeration. He normalized cold. That distinction is the heart of the story. He died in February 1864, age 80, in his Beacon Street mansion, very wealthy. He had outlived his brother's joke by more than 60 years and outlived his own imprisonment by half a century. By one estimate, his fortune is equivalent to roughly $200 million today. The natural ice empire he had built had perhaps 30 years left. The man who taught the world to want cold had made himself rich doing it. The technology that would end it had already been sketched. In 1851, a Florida physician named John Gorey, working on ways to cool the yellow fever wards of a coastal hospital, patented a mechanical ice-making machine. It was the first device that could make ice without a frozen lake. 25 years later, in 1876, a German engineer named Carl von Linde built the first reliable compressed ammonia refrigerator and founded the company that would carry his name. Neither Gorey nor Linde created the demand for their machines. Tudor had spent 30 years creating it. The machines only had to answer the question he had already planted, and they answered it cheaply, anywhere, in any climate, all year long. By the 1880s, plant ice was cheaper than lake ice. By 1900, the trade Tudor had invented was obsolete. Indian natural ice exports had peaked at 146,000 tons in 1856 and would not recover. The 1857 rebellion in India had shaken the colonial economy that had been Tudor's best customer, and the new machines were arriving just as the old ships were wearing out. The Ice King died wealthy, and his kingdom outlived him by less than 40 years. Why does the lone genius story still win? Because a clean arc is easier to remember than a network. A Brahmin who was mocked, went to prison, and emerged vindicated is a tidy parable. The actual network, William's joke, Wyeth's plow, the bartenders, the sawdust packers, the sailors, the British colonial demand, the customers who tasted cold for the first time, is a tangle. Tudor became the name on the company because his name was the one that sold papers, and because Boston Brahmins were the kind of people 19th century readers liked to read about. The myth survives because it is simpler than the truth, and because simple stories travel further than tangled ones. The cube in your glass is the end of a story that began in a frozen Massachusetts pond in 1806. Frederic Tudor did not win a clever bet about transporting a perishable commodity. He built the appetite that made it worth transporting, then watched that appetite grow into something no lake could satisfy. The man who taught the world to want cold is the reason your freezer exists. He also built the market that would replace him. Would you have bet your fortune on something that melts? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe to the Origin Portal for another strange beginning tomorrow.